Your cybersecurity solution is here. Introducing Pentester's Advanced Cybersecurity Suite. Ready for peace of mind? Try it for free. No credit card required. Pentester.com.
I started making some calls, and of course I found out that he got arrested, and then it was all over the news that night that he got arrested with John. And that's the famous case of bankers and brokers. It was a restaurant in Manhattan. Yeah, Bruce Cutler was a very flamboyant and really intelligent attorney. He had a lot of charisma. He had a lot of court, a lot of court appearance, he drew attention in court. He was very, very boisterous, loud. They were guilty. They just got found not guilty. I mean, Tony Lee got thrown in that case. Tony Lee had one, he just knew this guy. He knew them. Hello, everybody. My name is Anthony Ruggiano Jr. I want to welcome everybody to Reform Gangsters. And if you like our content, please hit the subscribe button and ring the bell. Also, be great to become a Patreon member. We're going to have a lot of new content coming out on Patreon. We're going to have a recovery sit down starting in 2 weeks on a Wednesday night at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. It's going to be, we're going to talk about recovery. If anybody needs any help, anybody needs, to talk to anybody, if anybody's struggling, please, log on. It's become a Patreon member. I'm going to be in New York next week doing two major podcasts, one out of England and one out of Canada. So I'm looking forward to that. So stay tuned, everybody. So this episode is going to be about Get Gotti, episode 3. I've been getting a lot of questions about it, about especially about the trial with the carpenter, the Okana trial, which I have some knowledge about. Because Tony Lee, my father's partner, was John's co-defendant, and I was actually living with Tony Lee when he was arrested. It's funny because he had a condo in Howard Beach, and I was living with him at the time, and I was out. I didn't even know he got arrested yet, and I was out, and I went home that late that afternoon, and when I walked in, the doors were wide open, and he was gone. And, he would never leave the door was actually wide open. And when I saw it, I walked in and he was gone, and there was some disruption in the condo. And then I started making some calls. And of course, I found out that he got arrested. And then it was all over the news that night that he got arrested with John. And that's the famous case of bankers and brokers. It was a restaurant in Manhattan that a made member of the Gambino family owned. I used to actually go there. It was a steakhouse. I used to go there with my father and Tony Lee and everybody back in the day. It was a really good restaurant. And he had it fixed by non-union workers. And the union president sent guys in there to wreck it. And it was a whole big thing. And that's the famous tape where at a funeral where John told the Westies put a rocket in his pocket. And they weren't going to kill him. They just wanted to teach him a lesson. And actually, I was room cellmates with Kevin Kelly, who was a Westie, a really good guy, a tough guy. I love him to death. We lived together for years. I used to tease him all the time. He used to tease me. He was a little bit of a cleaning fanatic, but, he was a great guy, man's man, tough guy, had a lot of respect in the joint, in the street. And he was actually the shooter. He actually shot Okana in the ass in an elevator. And he told me the whole story that the elevator opened and he turned around and boom, 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 he shot him in the ass. And it was all on the orders of Jimmy Coonan, put a rocket in his pocket. And, he didn't get charged with that. I don't think Kevin ever got charged with that. But they actually when the trial started, they actually brought Kevin down to the courthouse and tried to coerce him into cooperating. And he refused to cooperate, because he was facing a lot of time for murders on a RICO with the Westies, with Jimmy Coonan's case, with Featherstone and all that. So, they tried to coerce him into cooperating, and he didn't cooperate, and he got he did a lot of time. He did over 20 years. He's out now. And, during the trial, I didn't go to the trial. Tony really used to leave early, and I used to, wish him luck. But I never went to the courthouse. I just waited back in the neighborhood for them to come back. And I remember when the jury was going out for a verdict, Tony Lee told me that him and John made a pact that they wouldn't show no emotion one way or the other. They wouldn't give the government satisfaction of if they got found guilty, making a reaction, or they just weren't going to make any kind of reaction. And actually, when they got found not guilty, that's that famous pump fist that John gave, that little pump fist. But they were found not guilty, so that was great. That was a good thing. Yeah, Bruce Cutler was a very flamboyant and really intelligent attorney. He had a lot of charisma. He had a lot of court, a lot of court appearance. He drew attention in court. He was very, very boisterous, loud. Bruce did a great job. They had a great team. That John Pollock was on that team, and Bruce was on that team. Very good attorneys, mob lawyers. I didn't go. I stood in the neighborhood. We waited at the Cafe Liberty for Tony Lee to come back. It was very festive. Everybody was just excited that they got found not guilty. Because they were guilty. They just got found not guilty. I mean, Tony Lee got thrown in that case. Tony Lee had one. He just knew this guy. He knew them. He had one sit down with them, with Okana and all of them. After the restaurant got busted up, Tony Lee got pulled into it, because Tony Lee's been around forever, and he knew all the parties involved. And so John, made Tony Lee handle it, and Tony Lee winded up getting indicted with him.
Now the news labels in the Teflon Don. Was there?
I don't know if it was after that, because that was the first trial. I don't know. I think that was I don't remember. The first trial was the assault with the truck driver. I don't know if the Tony Lee case came second or third. I don't remember. I think they called him the Teflon Don after the Willie Boy trial, after he beat the case with Willie Boy Johnson when it was revealed he was a informant. That's when they labeled him the Teflon Don, because that was the third case he beat in a row.
Do you think John changed after that?
No. He always had a personality like that. I mean, he was always flashy. I mean, I think he got a lot more media attention after that, but I don't think he changed. I think he was always that way. I mean, it was John. John was John.
And then
I think let me. A lot of other guys that were getting a lot of press now around him, they were like blown, they changed. They started always dressing up and always looking good, because they always, wanted to get on camera with him. One guy, actually, I don't want to mention his name because he's still out there, and they even straightened him out years later. After John died, I think that Pete straightened him out when Pete became the boss, it was definitely after John died. This one guy that was around all of us used to run down the street when the cameras were there just to get on camera. And he would jump in the car with John, and he would do, just always want to get on camera. It was just, and he was with us. He was with Tony Lee and my father and Mikey Gal. He was with us, this guy. And they chased him. John chased him, because of his behavior, that he always wanted to get his face in front of the camera. John didn't kill him because of us, because of his relationship with Tony Lee. And he knew this guy. They grew up together in East New York. But John chased the guy, because he was always, and you still see him now. When you see films of John and Tony Lee, a lot of times you'll see him in the background, this guy, and so it did change people's personalities, because like I said earlier, I said it all the time. If wise guys, a lot of wise guys and love to see their name in the newspaper, even though it's derogatory stuff, they still like to get some press. It's an ego thing, I would say. The first time it happened was I was driving Tony Lee. It was probably in 88 or 89. And I was always with Tony Lee every day at that point. I was basically driving him around all over. And because I always wanted to get straightened out. And he had a lunch. He had a meeting with John for lunch in Brooklyn. This restaurant was right up the block from Jimmy Brown's club. For the life of me, I always forget the name of this restaurant. I can't believe I did it again. I always lose the. Starts with a T. Oh my God. Anyway, it was a restaurant right up the block from Jimmy Brown's club. It was a captain with the Gambino family. So I drive Tony Lee to the meet, and we walk into the restaurant, and John's sitting at the table with Joe Watts. So now it's the four of us at the table. Tony Lee, John, I'm sitting, matter of fact, I'm sitting here. I'll never forget, John's sitting here. Joe Watts was across the table, and Tony Lee was here. It was a table for four. And that's how it was. It was me, John, Joe Watts, and Tony Lee. And, John's talking to Tony Lee about what they had to talk about and all that. And we ordered lunch, and the restaurant is pretty crowded now. It's like brunch time, I would say. It's like 4 p.m. And we're all sitting at the table, and they start talking about trials, cases. Of course, they're talking about now getting pinched and indicted, and that the feds aren't going to stop, and all that. And we're all getting arrested. We're all being followed at this time, and Tony, I just got arrested on. There was a bug in Frank DeWap. He was a captain with the Genevieve, with the Lucchese family in Kennedy Airport. They just made a big union thing, a Teamster pinch. Tony Lee and my friend Carl Amato, they just had gotten arrested by the feds. Tony Lee was out on bail. He had a union case out of Kennedy Airport, so they're talking about cases. And John's looking around, and John sits back and he goes, look, the public, they love me. He goes, they love me. He goes, the worst I'll ever wind up with is a hung jury. So we just look at it. Yeah, he believed that. And then we're talking further, and all of a sudden this couple is leaving, and they come in towards the table, and they walk up to the table, and they go, oh, Mr. Gotti, we just want to say hello. Would it be all right if we get your autograph? And he gave them his autograph at the table. He took the thing and he gave them their autograph, and they walked away, and nobody said nothing. Me or Joe Watts or Tony Lee didn't say nothing. And he said, you see, the public loves me. So we finished eating. We got up. We walk out. We say goodbye. We kiss, boom, boom, boom. We go by. He leaves with Joe Watts. I get in the car with Tony Lee. As soon as Tony Lee closed the door, he exploded. What's wrong with that guy? I can't believe what I just saw. How dare him sign an autograph? And he was beside himself. But, he couldn't say, what was he going to do? He couldn't put him in check. The guy's the boss. He was beside himself. Tony, he couldn't believe what he just witnessed, that this guy signed an autograph. He was beside himself. How could he do that? And he was going on. I thought he was going to have a heart attack in the car. I just sat there and drove like me, people ask me how I felt about it. I was a little, I was just excited to be in his company personally, to be perfectly honest with you. I'm not, I was just excited to be there. You know what I mean? Like to be in that atmosphere, sitting down with the boss, with Joe Watts, I was just excited to be allowed to sit at that table, compared to the years before that, how that I almost died, and here I am now making a comeback, you know what I mean? I'm clean, I'm doing good, I'm making a ton of money now at this time, I'm in big action, I'm making crazy money, I'm living large, I'm looking good, I'm wearing $1,000 LeBaron suits, here I am, I'm sitting down in the restaurant with the boss of the family, Tony Lee, Joe Watts. We're having lunch. He's talking about stuff in front of me. I'm sure there's some bullshitters out there that are going to say, oh, that's bullshit, but it's not bullshit. This is what happened, so I was just excited to be there. So it really didn't faze me that I knew inwardly that he shouldn't have done that. And I knew how Tony Lee and my old man was going to feel about that, you know. And then when we went to visit my old man and we told him what he did, like he was another guy, you know, like he didn't agree with that. The second time I saw it happen was on Mulberry Street. Somebody walked up to him and asked him for his autograph, and he signed it. I think they had a book at that time or something, and he signed their autograph. So I saw him do it twice, but it was frowned upon by a lot of people. Sammy, the Bull, talks about it all the time, you know, about him claiming that he had a public. Like, guys like that aren't supposed to have publics. So the Ravenite, when you walked in straight to the back, there was a bathroom, and then there was a door. The door led out into the hallway, and you made a left and another left, and there was a staircase that went up to the second floor. You couldn't see it from the front of the building. You couldn't see. And anyway, and John at that point fortified the front of the Ravenite. He changed the look of the Ravenite. When O'Neill had it, it was big windows. It was like a storefront. John bricked it up, and there was little windows. So you really couldn't see into the Ravenite. You couldn't see the back door that led into the hallway. Above the Ravenite was this guy Mike. He was a wise guy. He was a made member of the main member of the Gambinos. He lived there for 100 years. Him and his wife, I knew him good. Mike D, they used to call him. When I first went around to the Ravenite, he was actually the coffee maker. And when he got straightened out, my father used to tease everybody. He'd say, "Yeah, Neil straightened him out because he made a good cappuccino." You know, because he got straightened out because he was just really, really close friends with Neil. Like, they grew up together, and you know, I guess they grew up together. So anyway, his apartment was on the second floor above the Ravenite, and he actually had just passed away. So his wife lived up there, and John was going up there for meetings. And someone gave it up, and you know, so the FBI had the Ravenite bugged, and like it said in the show, you know, they would hear his voice, and then they wouldn't. And they didn't know what happened. Like, his voice would stop, and for an hour or whatever, a half hour, until somebody, a confidential informant who was hanging out at the Ravenite, told them he was going upstairs into the apartment. You know, people ask me who do I think it was. I have no idea who it was. Who knows who it was? You know, it was somebody that he thought was his friend, I'm sure. There was somebody close to everybody because they were hanging out inside the Ravenite. Strangers just didn't hang out in the Ravenite. So it had to be someone that was close to them, you know, someone that was around a lot. And they gave up the apartment, and that was the end of John. Well, once it came out that they had that apartment bug, everybody knew that they had big problems. I mean, how do you get around the tape? You know what I mean? It's impossible. How do you discredit a tape? How do you discredit your own voice? How do you discredit your own conversation? It's not like a person. You can't cross-examine a tape. You know, so everybody knew at that point there was problems. And then I went away. I had to turn myself in July 2nd, 1991. I had to surrender myself on a gambling case that's legal now. I have a little resentment about that. But and then when I was away in 91, like I said many times, I was in the yard waiting for this guy Bobby to come out, who wind up getting straightened out. Bobby, his nickname was Bobby the Jew, but he wasn't Jewish. He was Italian. That was his nickname. And we used to walk the yard every night, him and I. We were in transit at the time. We were waiting to get shipped to our designations. It was a state prison. And we were in transit, so we hung out together every night. We met in the yard every night, and we would walk. And I was waiting for him to come out, and he was a little late that night. And then finally he came out, and when he came out to the yard, you know, I could see there was something on his mind, and he walked up to me, and the first words out of his mouth was, "That guy's co-defendant flipped," because we used to refer to John as that guy. That's how we talk, you know, that guy, and we knew it was John. And he said, "That guy's co-defendant flipped." And I said, "Well, Frankie." I thought right away it was Frankie Loke. I didn't think it was Sammy at all. I said, "Oh, Frankie Loke." And he goes, "No, Sammy." I said, "Sammy." And then I just knew. I said, "He's finished." And then I knew at that point he was done. I don't care who his attorneys were. Between the tapes and Sammy, I figured he was finished, John. And that was pretty much the consensus in the street because, you know, Tony Lee would visit me and he would tell me, that it's not good. The tapes were terrible and all that and on and on. If you're enjoying my show, please join my Patreon, ask your questions live, and please join my Patreon at reformgangsters.com.
Based on what you've heard on the tapes, if the FBI doesn't have that bug, do you think John eventually killed Sammy?
I don't know. I wasn't privy to that. I don't think so. Sammy was a good choice for him. There was rumors, when I was away, and like after Sammy flipped, and I said this many times. I told Sammy too, I believe. There was rumors. Guys would tell me that when John was in FCC, he told a few guys, if Fat Andy was in the street, I wouldn't be in this mess. He needed Sammy. Sammy was a Brooklyn guy. He was close to the Castellano crew. So, he was a good choice for that position. He was a tough guy. He was a killer, Sammy. He was smart. He was an earner. So, he was a good choice for that position. I don't know the answer to that question, to be honest. I'm not going to, some people think they know the answer. I wasn't privy to that information. Tony Lee never spoke bad about their relationship. Everybody knew who Sammy was, and everybody knew who John was. Everybody knew what they were about. I don't know one way or the other. Maybe he was. John was treacherous, but so was Sammy. So who knows? Maybe Sammy might have killed him. Yeah, once he got convicted and got life with no parole, I knew I was never going to see him again. But he used to write to us. I read the letters. I have more letters. I'll read it later on at a later date on Patreon. So become a Patreon member. The government still has some letters they need to return to me. I'm working on getting those returned. They're in the archives in some other state somewhere. I knew I would never see him again. But it was fucked. It was messed up. It was messed up. I knew, when I was away, when I was doing that last bid, well, right before I went away, right before I went away, my father, Tony Lee, died of stomach cancer. He died in 93. I went away in 96. So a couple of years later, I went away. While I was away, I saw my father. My father was away. My father got out in 97. In March of 97, I was in Florida fighting the case. They wouldn't even let my father come to the state. My father wanted to visit me in the MDC in Miami, and the feds, the government wouldn't allow him to even come to the state of Florida. He was barred out of the state of Florida because that's where his case was. So he couldn't even come to see me. He couldn't leave New York. He was so restricted. In 98, I saw my father in Elmira. When I went back to New York, I got a special visit in Elmira. The warden let him in. As a matter of fact, in Elmira, the warden actually came into the visiting room to say hello to Fat Andy. It was like, who was coming to visit me? This big celebrity was coming to the jail. The COs were all waiting for him, and because I had to get a special visit for him to come to visit me. And actually the warden came into the visiting room and to meet him, and that was the last time I saw my father alive. We had that conversation about the captain being a captain and all that, and about that the mob was over, the fear factor, and everybody's cooperating and on and on. Then in 99, my father died, and I was incarcerated. And I never went to his funeral because they wouldn't take me to his funeral. They denied me to go to his funeral. Somebody in Washington shot my request down, so I never got to go to his funeral. And then John died. I still had close ties in the street to Nicky Carrazza. He was a captain. My father straightened him out. And Lenny DiMaria, he was another captain. I had close ties with them. Actually, they had me transferred to their crew because when I got out in 04, a wise guy came to see me and told me that I was with them now, and Nicky proposed me and all, and on and on and on. So I had pretty close ties with him, but it wasn't the same as when I was younger. And then when I got arrested for the last RICO with the murder, the murder as a predicate, and I was facing life. When they first arrested me, and I was held on a crazy bail. I couldn't get out right away, so I had to lay up for a couple of weeks. But I was in, I don't know, I was there about 2 days, and I got a legal visit from this attorney, Joe Carrazza. He's Joe Carrazza's son. He's a mob attorney, very good attorney. You know, I know him since he's a little kid. We used to go to Yankee games together. I mean, I know him all his life. He came to visit me. He wasn't my attorney at the time, but he was my co-defendant's attorney. And he came to visit me. My attorney at the time was Tony Lamandino, because I knew I was getting arrested. You know, I knew at that point I was told that there was another indictment coming down, and they weren't sure if it was Junior, John Gotti Jr., Ronnie One Arm, or me. I was sent to the city by mob lawyers. I don't want to say their names because they're still in the street. They're still practicing law. They'll probably deny it anyway, but you know, that's another story for another day. So I was sent for, and the lawyer told me, listen, there's another pinch coming down, but we don't know if it's John, Ronnie One Arm, or you. We're not sure, but we know it's one of the three of yous with Dominic on Dominic's case. Dominic, Skinny Dom, had already got arrested. And of course it was me, because I was won those lotteries, you know, and so I get arrested. I'm facing life. I'm there 2 days. Joseph Carrazza comes to visit me, and I remember like it was yesterday. I'm sitting in the attorney room, in the visiting room at MDC in Brooklyn, and I looked right at him. I go, listen, I'm ready to take a plea. I'll take a plea right now. I said, go and see if they want to give me 10 years, 10, 15 years. I'll take a plea right now. You know, at that time I was in my early 50s. I was in my early 50s when that happened. So I was willing to take 10 years, even 15 years, because I figured they had me. They had cooperators, you know, they had, you know, and I wasn't willing to spend the rest of my life in prison, you know, not if I could avoid it. And I told them, listen, I'll take a plea right now. You know, let's negotiate. You know, I'll take 10 years. I'll take 15 years. You know, I'll take a plea right now, because I knew if I took a plea, there would be light at the end of the tunnel. You know what I mean? I knew how to do time. I already did 8 years, just finished doing 8 years and 3 months. I know how to stay healthy in prison. You know, and I know how to kick back and read a book. You know, I did almost 14 years in prison. Not that I wanted to go to prison or I was looking forward to going to prison, but at that point in time, I'm facing life for murder. You know, I'll take 10, 15-year plea. He looks at me and he says to me, what, do you like being in jail? Now, he was my attorney on other cases that I went away on, primarily bookmaking cases. He was the attorney on the case, the lead attorney on the last case I went away with when I got a 2-4. And I looked at him and I said, what? And my exact words to him were, Joseph, this is not no bullshit bookmaking case. This is forever. This is lights out. I told him, this ain't no bullshit bookmaking case. And he goes, well, we're not going to take a plea. And the government, you know, they weren't going to just sever me or plead me out. It had to be a universal plea. So that was the beginning of the wheels starting to turn about what was going on, about me being thrown under the bus, that these guys weren't looking out for me, that the world was different now. And I'm not making excuses, you know, like No Excuse podcast. I'm not making excuses, but this is the beginning of when the wheels started to turn in my head about maybe it's time to, you know, to maybe do something different, get out of, you know, like get off this treadmill, you know what I mean? Like that's when the wheels started turning, when I was told that I couldn't take a plea, that they weren't willing to negotiate a plea. Like my co-defendant wasn't interested, and that's when the wheels started to turn in my head. But if I would have been able to take a plea, I would have never cooperated. I would have took 10 years. I might have even took 15 years. You know, because like I said, I was young enough to do the time, and I was healthy enough to do the time. And, you know, not that I would wanted to do it, you know, not that I would have looked forward to doing it, but, you know, it wouldn't have been forever. So who knows? But that's, you know, that's neither here nor there. That didn't transpire, and what transpired. But that was the beginning of the thought process for me.
And to wrap up episode 3, Get Gotti, at the end, the prosecutor says that John Gotti made a spectacle of a secret society, and he brought down the mob. John Gotti brought down the mob. Do you agree?
Listen, Mikey Francis talks about this all the time, and he makes a lot of sense. John Gotti didn't single-handedly bring down the mob. The RICO status brought down the mob. Like, we know that. I even spoke about that. When that RICO law came into effect and Funds Wild, the old man, the boss of the Genovese family before the chin, he was the first person to be charged with the RICO. And I remember, like it was yesterday, my father sitting at the kitchen table with his robe on and his cup of coffee and his cigarette in the ashtray with the Daily News opened up in front of him. I remember like it was yesterday. I walked up the steps. I sat down at the end of the table, and he went just like this. He went, "It's all over for us. They convicted him for a RICO. That's it. We're done." And that was it. And after that, my father and I and Tony Lee and John and Mikey Francis and Sammy the Bull and all of us went to jail for RICOs. Everybody I know went to jail for a RICO. So what he did was he put it on Front Street. The media made him a document. The media did that. The media put him on Front Street, and he fed into it. He brought a lot of heat on us. He didn't bring it down. He brought a lot of heat on us. I would say more than that. In a way, that's bringing it down also, but he brought a lot of heat upon us. We paid the price for being around him. Listen, I was a nobody. Well, I shouldn't say that. I wasn't on any high level. And because of my relationship with him and because I was Fat Andy's son, every case I got indicted for, RICOs, state cases, every case I got indicted for, I got the most time and I went to the worst prisons all the time. And the only reason that happened was because I was around John Gotti and Fat Andy was my father. That's the only reason why that happened. So what he did was he put it on Front Street. He brought a lot of heat on us, on himself and on everybody around him. And a lot of people paid the price for that. He was a component in bringing down the mob, but the RICO status is the real culprit. All right, I want to thank everybody for tuning in. And don't forget to please hit the subscribe button and ring the bell and become a Patreon member. We got a lot of new content, a lot of exciting content coming up. And don't forget about the recovery sit down in 2 weeks, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Not this Wednesday coming. I'll be out of town, but the following Wednesday.